Zaczynamy kolejne spotkanie z cyklu Czasy ekonomiczne. Tym razem będziemy mówić o czasie, a ściślej o czasie pracy. Zaprosiliśmy Annę Coote z Economics Fundation, która tym tematem się zajmuje już od bardzo dawna, jest autorką wielu publikacji z tym związanych i ona jest adwokatką skracania czasu pracy, generalnie rzecz biorąc. Spotkanie będzie poświęcone omawianiu korzyści z takiego rozwiązania i no właśnie, no bo jakby nie jest to tak oczywiste, jakby się mogło wydawać na pierwszy rzut oka. Znaczy, ekonomicznie wydaje się, że to jest trudne do wprowadzenia, ale z drugiej strony być może wzrost wydajności gospodarki, który nastąpił w ostatnich dziesięcioleciach, pozwala nam na myślenie o takich rozwiązaniach. Kiedyś pracowano, na początku rewolucji przemysłowej pracowano kilkanaście nawet godzin dziennie, z czasem ten czas był skracany i uważano to za jakiś postęp, więc być może pora pomyśleć o tym, żeby myśląc właśnie też o zrównoważonej gospodarce, skrócić czas pracy jeszcze bardziej. 40 godzin to być może za dużo. W sytuacji, kiedy mamy jakąś wąską elitę osób przepracowanych, a z drugiej całe rzesze ludzi bezrobotnych lub pracujących w niepełnym wymiarze pracy, chociaż chcieliby pracować dłużej, więc może jest coś nie tak z tą dystrybucją czasu pracy. No ale już nie będę mu dłużej mówił, wystarczy w zupełności. Przypominam, że jest z nami tłumacz i tłumaczenie będzie dostępne dla każdego, kto potrzebuje. A teraz już oddaję głos Annie Coote.
I'm going to talk about time. This is a subject of great interest to us at the New Economics Foundation in London. We are a think tank that is particularly interested in considering the ways in which what we can do to build an economic system that serves the interests of people and the planet and not the other way around. So that's what the New Economics Foundation is about. It's about sustainable development, about sustainability. And time plays how we value and use time and how we distribute paid and unpaid time is for us a very important way of trying to build a sustainable future. So there we are. We're often told that time is short. I don't know if you know the expression time is money, and that money makes the world go round. So we must use our time to get money because that's the only way we can go on making the world go round. Well, we would like to challenge that. In fact, it's worth remembering that this is a lovely old sundial from prehistoric times. It's in the Archaeological Museum in Istanbul. And I put it there to show that we've always been measuring time, but it's only very recently, in fact, that we've begun to think of time as discrete, measurable units that are uniform across the world. So whether you're in Poland or the UK or America or China, you have the same minutes and hours and weeks and days. And that means, of course, that we can sell our time. Means that time is a commodity, has become a commodity. But in fact, time can be experienced and used in all sorts of different ways. It can be a gift. It can be a privilege. You may know the expression, the idle rich. It's a privilege to have a lot of time to spare. It can be an object of plunder, something that's stolen from you. And some people experience time as a kind of a tyrant, that we're always so busy. So the point is that we should think much more flexibly about what time means to us. And the fact that we tend to think of it as a tradable commodity is A, only as recent as the Industrial Revolution, and B, not the only way that we use time. And all times are not equal, in fact. Time can be stretched out and you can do many different things in a space of time, or you can do nothing. So time is a much more complicated and interesting thing than just minutes and hours and weeks and days that you sell for money. So that's the first point. This is what the book that we've just published. It's called Time on Our Side, and it brings together a range of academic, mainly academic, and some political experts thinking about the case for a shorter working week from different perspectives, from an ecological perspective, an economic perspective, a philosophical perspective, a sociological perspective. And the question we're asking ourselves is, why do we all think we're so busy? Where does our time go, and how much is our time really worth? And if we don't know the answer to those questions, we have to think again about time and what it's worth. So anyone who wants the book, you can find it on our website. I'll come back to that. So the proposition that we make is, what if, instead of just accepting that it's a good thing to work as long and as hard as we can for as many hours, we move gradually over a period of, say, 10 years towards shorter average working hours, so that 30 hours becomes the new standard working week for all workers. That's the proposition. And there are many reasons why we think that it's worth considering. There's always no such thing as a good idea, a new idea. In 1930, the great economist John Maynard Keynes predicted that by the 21st century, because of the rise in productivity per capita, no one would have to work more than 15 hours a week. And our main concern, thought Keynes, was how we could possibly use this freedom from pressing economic cares. How would we dispose of all this time? Well, Keynes was right about an awful lot of things, but he was spectacularly wrong about that. And it's partly because he did not predict, he was right to predict that there would be a dramatic rise in productivity, but what he didn't predict was the way in which the workers' share of productivity gains would be drastically curtailed. Nor did he predict that in the rich world there would be this increased momentum towards more and more consumption, buying stuff, consuming stuff. That consuming things would become so central to the lives of people in the rich world. So these two things, the kind of upward spiral of consumption and the downward trend of workers' share of productivity gains, are two reasons why we work long hours today, and why these were two things that Keynes did not predict. So we have overworked people and we have underworked people, and it's worth asking ourselves why people spend so much time in paid work when others have so little. I've said, well, people feel they don't have enough money, which is fair enough, and also that we have got into the habit, there's a culture that we need to aspire to work long hours, to earn a lot of money, to buy a lot of stuff, to increase our status, and that is how we measure success. So we measure success by aspiring to high levels of consumption and high levels of earning, and that means working long hours, and that's a lot of why that happens. And I want to make a distinction here between what goes on in places like the United States and the UK and the rich countries of Europe and what goes on in other countries, because I know that that in countries where the average level of earning is not so high, this will seem much more controversial as a proposition. But for reasons I will explain in a minute, we think it's important for people in developing countries, in lower income countries, as well as people in high income countries, to think of this as the future. This is the direction we want to go in, towards a slower life, towards lower levels of consumption, and towards shorter working hours, and towards distributing paid and unpaid work more equally between those who have and those who have not got work. So I put these figures together just to see how things compared across some European countries. So you can see, interestingly, that one of the countries that has got the most disastrous economy in the Eurozone, at least, is Greece. They also have the longest hours. Poland has got way above average working hours. UK, Germany and Denmark are below the European average. Now, if you look at rates of unemployment, there are some interesting points here, but although Poland is not doing so badly, it's slightly below the European average on rates of unemployment. There's a general trend where countries with higher levels of longer working hours tend to have higher levels of unemployment. Now, to come back to the kind of central reason why we think it's important to reduce the number of hours we work, we face, all of us, a toxic triple crisis. We have accelerating damage to the natural environment, we have widening social and economic inequalities, and we have a very serious economic downturn and a very unstable economic system. And this combination of crises is unique in human history. We have not been in this place before. We've never had this combination of social, economic, and environmental crises, all working together, all impacting on each other. We think that time, redistributing paid and unpaid time, can help us to get out of this mess. We don't suggest that it's any kind of magical solution, that it's not a silver bullet, as we would say, but we think it has some promise and it's worth consideration. I want to go through some of the social reasons for working shorter hours. If you have shorter hours, average hours, you can get more jobs for people who have no jobs, so there will be more people in paid work, which we think is a good thing. But the people in paid work, if they're working shorter hours, will suffer less from stress and anxiety. There are very clear connections between levels of anxiety and stress and mental ill health and long hours of working. People will feel, or more people are more likely to feel, that they have control over their time. And that's very important, a very important determinant of health and well-being, in fact. So there's better well-being both for people who are currently without work, because they will be more likely to be able to get work, and for those who are overworked. I'm also firmly convinced that moving to a shorter working week, both for men and for women, is a really important way of tackling entrenched inequalities between women and men, because it becomes possible for mothers and fathers to share parental leave, childcare, and domestic work between them. And certainly in the UK, I'm sure it happens here too, women get locked into patterns of sometimes shorter hours working, low-paid jobs, having no disposable time of their own, because they are trying to do both the paid work and the unpaid work. So I think moving to a shorter working week is not just about letting more women do part-time work. That's not what we mean at all. It is about fairer shares between men and women and trying to unlock very, very entrenched and intractable problems of gender inequality. We also make the point that if we had less time in paid work, we'd have more time for caring for one another, for civic action in our communities, volunteering, doing the sort of work that makes society more cohesive, more interesting to be in, more resilient, and also making more of later life. So the transition from being in work and retired would be much more gentle. So that's another thing. And we say too that we think, certainly in the UK and in other European countries, I'm not sure about Poland, but politics are really moribund. Nobody wants to get involved in politics, to find out what's going on, to be active, and these things take time. And I think one of the main reasons why our political systems are in such a poor state is that not enough people have enough time to be politically active and engaged. So those are some of the social reasons for working shorter hours. We then come on to the environmental reasons, which I've mentioned already, but the point is to try and get off this treadmill that we're on, where we feel we live to work, we work to earn, we earn to consume, and the things that we consume are made in ways that are wrecking the planet. So this is trying to move to a different set of values, if you like. So we think about life in a different way, live it more slowly. We're working to live, not living to work. And we have more time to live sustainably. It's certainly true that a lot of the high energy consumption that people do, so the things that we buy, like processed convenience foods and car travel and airplane journeys, which I've just taken, so I can't, mea culpa. We do these because we're busy and because it's more convenient, and we're in a hurry and we have to buy things. We have to chuck things away and buy new things because we're in too much of a hurry. Now, this may not be true in Poland, in this society here, but it is certainly true in London, where I come from. And this is not the kind of set of values and lifestyle that we can all aspire to and achieve without wrecking the planet. So there are very strong environmental reasons for shorter working hours. This is again another example of the fastest growing business in the UK is personal self-storage. This is where we end up with high consumption. People buy more things than they can fit in their homes. So we fill up our cupboards and our attics and our basements and our garages or outhouses if we have them, and then we go and we rent a self-storage unit. Now, I don't think anybody needs to be in that kind of society. I don't want to live in that kind of society. I think and all the things that are in those personal self-storage units have been manufactured, many of them in the developing world, with high levels of energy and environmental footprint and carbon emissions. So I think that's just an example, an illustration to show you how bad things are getting. You see these things outside every city in the UK. So economic reasons for shorter working hours. Well, if there are more jobs for more people, there'll be fewer people who are claiming benefits from the state, so that's useful for the economy as a whole. It also has been recognized by leading economists as helping to manage a low-growth economy, that is, one that is sustainable, and helping to end credit-fueled consumption. So if we want to move to an economy that isn't just growing and growing and growing without any regard to the state of the natural environment, moving to shorter working hours is an important part of that plan, because it means that instead of just assuming you're going to end up with a lot of unemployment, you can distribute the paid work more evenly among the working age population. There's good evidence that people who work short hours are more productive hour for hour, and also that they make for a more stable and productive workforce. So it's good for companies to have workers who are stable and committed and loyal, who don't get stressed and anxious, and who are productive for the times that they are there. So for the business of doing commerce and running companies and so on, it's not a bad thing. We have a lot of work to do to persuade employers, but it can be done, and it is being done in many more companies than you'd think. So it makes for a more resilient and adaptable economy over time. Here are some examples of doing things differently. In the 1970s in the UK, we had the miners' strike, and there was a national 3-day week for several months, because the miners were keeping the coal from the power stations, and there wasn't enough electricity, so everybody had to go on to a 3-day week. And people thought that there would be a great decline in productivity. In fact, it didn't work out that way. So it has been done in the UK in a big way. The French had an experiment between 2000 and 2008 with the 35-hour week, which was remarkably successful in spite of some of the bad press it's had, and very popular with workers. In the state of Utah, in the United States, they had a year-long experiment with a 4-day week when they compressed a 40-hour week into 4 days. So people were working for 10 hours a day, but they had a 3-day weekend, and that was very popular. It reduced the carbon footprint of the public buildings and organizations, and it also saved money. Then now, some of you may have heard of this experiment in Gothenburg. They've introduced a 30-hour week for some of the city workers, and they're going to compare their productivity with other workers who haven't been reduced to a 30-hour week over a period of a year, because the mayor believes that people get less productive after they've done 30 hours. And we have just started at the New Economics Foundation compiling a database of experiments in shorter hours, and there are a huge number of examples of public policy where it's countries that are changing the laws or introducing shorter weeks, or private companies, some individual experiences, a lot of examples of that we don't hear about. So there's a lot of it going on, and generally the signs are that people are happier, healthier, that there isn't a decline in productivity. People are just as productive hour for hour, is what I'm saying. And so it could be done. Now, this is an interesting chart that shows that in 1980, on this side of the screen, you can see that the United States and Germany were almost exactly at the same point with their average hours per capita. And look how those two countries diverged in between 1980 and 2010. So the argument there is, which is the more successful economy? Now look at average hours per capita in these 10 countries, going from the Netherlands, which has the smallest, to Italy, which has the longest. If, as some economists argue, reducing the working week is bad for the economy, you'd expect, if you looked at the GDP for these countries, for it to follow that red line. But look, here you have gross domestic product per capita for the same countries, and look at the difference. So there is no correlation between the average working hours and the strength of a country's economy. So what are the challenges? There are lots of them. What we're trying to do is we're not expecting politicians to pass laws tomorrow that will bring this in. We're trying to change people's attitudes and draw attention to practical experiments and get things moving gradually. But we know that there are problems. The most obvious one is that if you simply try to reduce the length of the working week without any increase in wages, the poor will be hardest hit. So that's the most obvious problem with the transition. There are also problems about people just doing more overtime. So there's no chance for people without jobs to have the spare time that they're not doing, because they will still be done, but it'll be overtime. It goes against the grain of business culture, where it's still widely thought that a successful business keeps all its workers working really long hours. There are, generally speaking, quite poor incentives for employers to change their ways, and that needs to be addressed. Some employers will resist for all sorts of reasons. Perhaps they enjoy their work too much and don't ever want to stop. To that I would say, well, if you really enjoy your work that much, why not work for no money if it's that much fun? That's a more complicated argument. And then there are questions about whether you just do it on a voluntary basis gradually, or whether you bring in regulations, and how you balance trying to change the culture and the practice gradually and on a voluntary basis, and bringing in regulatory backing. Here are some ideas about how to make the transition. Now, this great American economist and sociologist Juliet Shaw has done a lot of work. She's written a book called The Overworked American. And her proposal is that workers who do have collective bargaining or annual pay agreements with their employers could negotiate a small time increment each year along with the annual pay, so less money and a bit more time. Not a reduction, but less of an increase and a bit more time. So if there is something to be given, an increase in pay, say, to be given to employees, you take some of it in money and some of it in time. Another proposal is that all new people coming into the labour market for the first time start on a 30-hour week. So they don't lose anything, and then they stay that way. So that each year you get a new cohort of workers on 30 hours, and gradually it becomes the norm. That's another suggestion. We've also suggested that older workers could reduce their working week by 1 hour per year. So if you start at 55, say, and you're on a 40-hour week, by 65 you'd be on a 30-hour week, and by 75 you could be on a 20-hour week. So instead of having a sudden drop to retirement, you just go gradually like that. Employers' costs are calculated for each employee they have, but perhaps it should be on a basis of how much time they're bringing people in for, not per employee. You do need more training to fill skills gaps, and you would need to regulate for flexibility, because it is really important that people feel they have control over their time. And so you want to have things like not just everybody works a 30-hour week, but you could have school term shifts, you could have sabbaticals, you could have job sharing. There are lots of ways you could do this. So we're not suggesting it should be one size fits all. And then you have to do something about low pay, and this is always has to be part of this move. If you're going to go towards a shorter working week, you've got to address the levels of pay per hour. And when people say to us, you can't move to a shorter working week because people can't afford it, the response we would make is that that's a problem of low pay. It's a problem about the rates of pay that people get. It's not a problem about hours. So what we need to think about is how to raise the minimum hourly wage, how to improve state benefits, how you have secure, high-quality health, education, and other essential services, and how you can do more with your unpaid time. That means you need less money to live. So growing food, cooking food, making things. There's all ways in which we can think differently about how we use our time in order to need less money. But the most important thing here is to see a campaign for a shorter working week going hand in hand with a campaign for workers getting a fairer share of the productivity gains from the economy. There are lots of things where people have felt there was no possibility of change. And things that seemed once to be completely unchangeable, within a short period of time, became the norm. So here we have the slave trade. The law we have in our country, I don't know if you do, but if you're going to ride a motorcycle, you have to wear a helmet. There was a huge row about that before it came in. Said, it'll never happen. No, it can't possibly be done. Votes for women was considered inconceivable. A very short period of time before it became the norm, and a ban on smoking in public places. Do you have that here? Yes. And was there a big row before they brought it in? And everybody said, this can't be done, nobody will accept it. Well, those are 4 examples of change that have happened in an area where people thought there could be no change. So we're saying if you get the right combination of circumstances, you can change things. It is possible. Thank you.
Tak, to jest, dziękuję bardzo, to jest czas na zadawanie pytań, więc jeśli macie jakieś pytania, to zachęcam.
Po angielsku. Good evening. I have two questions. I'm actually writing my PhD thesis on the regulation of the working week, so maybe they will be more detailed than you've expected. My first question is on a book that you surely know, Arlie Hochschild, The Time Bind, who has argued that actually people she has done a research on the American workers, and she argues that actually people want to work longer because the work life is more satisfying than the family life. So how would you approach that? I mean, do you think that this is some form of false consciousness, or how would you approach that, given that I believe that this type of research was repeated in UK, and I think that the results were similar. So that's my first question. The second question is actually, I don't believe that you've explained why do you believe that the idea of reducing the work week is also good for less developed countries. What I mean is that when I'm looking at your presentation, I think that it's very Anglo-Saxon centered, especially the idea that you've put on the beginning was the bifurcation of the working time, the overworked and the underworked. So it's Jacob and Gerson's idea, and from what I know, it doesn't apply to the most of continent European countries.
Sorry, what doesn't apply? Just can you clarify that?
The idea of that we have this time divide between the overworked and the underworked people.
Okay.
I'm now doing some research on this idea in terms of with regards to Poland, and it certainly doesn't apply. My third question is maybe the most complicated one. How would you approach the criticism that was launched by the academics from cognitive capitalism circles, who claim that actually the idea of reducing the work week is not a crucial one, given that most of the value-adding production process happens outside the production per se. This is the idea that given the cognitive shift in nowadays economy, the value-adding the value-adding production happens outside the work sensu stricto. I mean that, for instance, watching TV and the commercials on the TV is a value-adding production that is not happening in the relations between the employer and the employee. What they claim is that the most essential thing in today's economy is actually the commodification of leisure and not reducing of the work week, because
The commodification, not the decommodification.
the decommodification of leisure.
Of leisure, the decommodification of leisure.
Yeah, is the most important thing.
To decommodify.
Yeah, yes, to
The
do.
problem, the problem is the commodification of leisure.
Yes, that is the problem, and we have to decommodify leisure because, well, the production process have somehow spilled over the areas of life that were not commodified.
Okay, this is very interesting. You should be giving this talk, not me. You've got lots to say, and I think your questions are really interesting. Let me just start with that last one. And I mean, I'm not sure I consider myself an expert in that area, but I would say that the commodification of leisure is only a small part of unpaid time. And I would worry about just thinking of it as being paid work and then leisure, because of all the other things that mainly women do in their unpaid time are not about leisure, and nor are they commodified. So it's about time for caring and looking after the family and domestic labor and things like that. So I'm sure it's important to decommodify leisure, and to use leisure in a different way. Absolute, that's completely consistent with our argument. But I don't think that it's just about leisure and paid work, because there's this huge area of unpaid work in there that is uncommodified and that makes the world go round, in fact, and that is what locks in gender inequalities and a lot of other things too. So that's my answer to that one. Now, you said my presentation is Anglo-Saxon centered. You're absolutely right. It is completely centered because it's based on my experience. If indeed, how much would I love to have the time to do the work on a broader scale, but I haven't got the time or the money to do it, which is a great tragedy for me. But what the point that I'm trying to make about the bringing this argument, if you like, from rich countries and saying it applies globally, is that there is this notion that the developing countries we all have to be on the same trajectory, aiming to be like the United States. Yeah? Now, you look like you think that might be quite fun, but I don't think that's sustainable. So in terms of sustainability, we have to grasp this very difficult point, which is that yes, indeed, the rich countries have to do a lot more to cut their ecological footprint and to change their ways. And we do want developing countries to have a lot more of what rich countries have. But the path of development could be very, very different. It could be not just about thinking in terms of increasing GDP, gross domestic product, and making more stuff and having more things and having those self-storage units and buying more. We could have a different kind of development. We could have sustainable development. So that's the point I'm trying to make. And I completely recognize that this presentation is Anglo-Saxon centered, and I would love to know more about other countries and to do it in a subtler way. So I'm sorry about that. You said that you referred me to somebody who said that people work long hours because they enjoy it. There is some evidence of this. Actually, the most recent polling in the UK shows that most people would prefer not to work longer hours or to work shorter hours. So, but it's true, and this is a point that Robert Skidelsky, who's contributed to this book, makes about work being much more congenial these days than it used to be. So if you're not going in and working very hard manual work and you meet people who are your friends and you want to go to work. So it's true that work is more congenial. So I don't disagree with that, but and I also think it's true that some men and some women go to work in order to get away from the kids, because that's hard work at home. So it is, you go somewhere different and it's good. But actually, the polling evidence suggests that people would prefer to have more time at their disposal. And that's the majority of people. And so we can recognize that work is more congenial now than it used to be for some people, and certainly not for everybody. But I would disagree with you and with the person that you cited that everybody just loves going to work because it's such fun. And I would also say that if the consequence of working long hours is high energy consumption, we need to tackle it on that basis as well. I think that's all your questions.
Hi. Some people, for quite similar reason, advocate for minimum basic income, which is also a nice idea. And it seems that we cannot have those ideas like both, shortening working week and universal basic income. So, would you agree that this is something like an either or, and why you prefer, shortening working week?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that one. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. In fact, quite a few of the people who have been supportive of our arguments for a shorter working week are advocates of a basic income. I'm not in favour of basic income as a kind of policy solution. It might be something interesting, but I don't think it's the difference between a basic income as a proposition and a shorter working week as a proposition is that a shorter working week can be done in all sorts of different ways. It's much more, you can do it gradually, you can do it flexibly, and also it has these implications for environment and society as well as economy. And I don't think the basic income does. My objections to the basic income idea are that it's not, to make it sufficient would be unaffordable. So it's sort of amazingly unrealistic at one level, that it holds within it a real danger of recommodifying public services. And some of the so-called successful examples of introducing a basic income into poor countries show us that the money is used for things like education and healthcare, which are currently public services that are collaboratively and collectively paid for and produced in our countries. So I think it also it's atomizing, so it's just treating everybody as an economic agent. You give them the money, that's it, you don't have to do anything else. So I think it's dangerous, and I can understand I think it's seductive, and so I think this is a much better idea.
I have a question, because I don't quite grasp the idea of how reducing the working time would influence the total level of consumption. I'm not sure if it's not obvious for me that the result is a diminished consumption, decreased consumption level, because some people would gain employment and therefore income. Some would have lower income, but the general level of consumption could be the same or even more, considering that people who are now overworked and don't have time to spend money, don't have even time to consume what they earn, would have this time. So they could travel, for example, more. They could use their money to consume. So I don't see this connection between reducing working time and reducing the consumption level. Could you explain that?
Yes, well, there isn't a sort of perfect equation here, and I'm glad you asked that question, because it's not about saying if you do this, then this will happen. But if you do this, if you move to a shorter working week, it opens up the possibility of changing our values about how we use our time. So it's not quite. I hope I'm not. You don't understand me as saying this will automatically happen, but it will change our values. And also, if you look at it the other way round, if we need to find ways of managing a sustainable economy, and this is the work of economists like Tim Jackson and Peter Victor, who've set themselves the task of working out how you run an economy that is ecologically sustainable, and looking at this prospect of reducing levels of growth and then having less productive labor, if you like. And then they say, and I agree with them, that redistributing the paid work more evenly, if you like, among the working population is one way of managing a low growth economy or a sustainable economy. So it's both. It could both be a way of managing that, and also would help us to change our hearts and minds about what we think is important in life. So, but you're right. It's true. If we just everybody had the same amount of money, say, and of course the other thing is it would, certainly for people on middle incomes, if we would reduce the amount that they earn, there would be less money to spend on high energy consumer goods. But let's suppose that everybody was working 40 hours and nothing else changed, 30 hours, and nothing else changed. And there would be lots of people who would just go out shopping if they could afford it. So it's part of the mix of moving towards a sustainable economy. It's not the way of doing it.
Okay, are there more questions? Zaczynam mówić po angielsku. Czy są jeszcze jakieś pytania?
So there's another perverse argument. Some people say that indeed we should limit our levels of consumption, but we should work as we do and redistribute the product to the so-called, third world countries or former third world countries. So we should keep because we have two options basically. Massive immigration from Africa to Europe, or redistribution from the rich part of the world to, let's say, Africa and other places like that. So we should keep the hours long, work as we do, but redistribute much of the product to other parts of the world. What would you say to that?
Well, I would guess from the sorts of questions you're asking that you've already worked this out, but most of what we consume in this country is made in other countries. Most of what we consume in the UK is made in other countries. I'm not sure about Poland, but I would imagine there's an increasing amount being made in China, in India, in Brazil. And so we have exported our carbon emissions, which we can't do. So it isn't a simple matter of working hard and redistributing wealth. We have to redistribute, we have to change, transform the way we manage the economy in developing and and in developed countries. So no, I would say no to your proposition. And we ought never to forget how much we simply, just move all our ecological crimes offshore, so that China is busy making the stuff and emitting the carbon, and we enjoy the goods. It's not good enough.
Hello, I have a question about this gender issue you were talking about and relating it to lowering the hours of work, because the relationship is not clear for me, because I get it that if men work less, then they will be able to do more in the caring work than without pay by women. But on the other hand, there is an argument saying that to solve this problem, you have to pay for care. I mean, the care work must be paid work and not unpaid work. And I don't see this happening. It could also go into the direction that if you lower like the amount of hours women work, they will just have more time to do the care work at home. And this, I'm not really sure of this consequence.
Okay, well, I mean, again, it's partly about culture change. Yes, so if we get to the point where it becomes normal for men to work what we now consider part-time, the time that women tend to work, then this begins to shift the balance of earning power and domestic arrangements between women and men. We've done some work at New Economics Foundation about the impact of a shorter working week on childcare. It's very interesting, because if you if you take a sort of simple calculation, and both and in a family where there are two parents and let's say one child, just for the sake of the argument, they both reduce their working week by an hour a day, say 5 days a week, okay, and they put that time into childcare at home, then it reduces the amount of childcare they have to buy, and it actually makes it much easier to extend childcare and have it of a higher quality. So if you've got parents putting in more time into domestically based childcare, it becomes more affordable and more accessible to more families. So that's one thing. The other thing that becomes possible if time is freed up from paid work is that parents can contribute to, and we have some models of this in the UK, to childcare cooperatives, so that you are you go there with the child, and so you can help to extend the amount of childcare that is available. So it both helps to transform relations between women and men, and it makes childcare more affordable. So I don't think that it would lead to just more women doing more childcare, unless, of course, it was not for men, it was just for women. But it's got to be for both women and men, otherwise the whole thing falls down.
I have an impression that it wasn't emphasized enough that not all productive, not all work, not all paid work is productive. Like I think there is some kind of Protestant work ethic behind what we say here, because as David Graeber, for example, written in his article, there is a lot of what he called bullshit jobs. I mean, people do work which isn't really productive and isn't very beneficial for the society, and they get paid for it. So yes, and that's one thing. And the second thing, which is quite connected, is the automatization of work. So I mean, the goods are increasingly produced without any human labor. So maybe that's also something worth pointing out, that we can also reduce working hours because there simply isn't that much productive and useful work to do for money. I mean, yes, well, it can be done, but it's not really necessary. What's your take on this?
Well, this was where we came in with Keynes, because that's what Keynes was predicting. You will need less paid labor because we were going to be technological change would make us more productive. So I mean, there is certainly some truth in that, and there's certainly truth in the fact that there are bullshit jobs that are not, well, they probably are productive in formal economic terms, but they're not productive in human terms or social terms, if you like. So there's that. Then there are all the jobs that are not productive in economic terms, but are hugely productive in human and social terms. All the caring jobs, healthcare, education, these jobs are not technically productive. Well, actually, I suppose teaching can be described as productive, but if you're looking after a frail older person, you're not doing in formal economic terms a productive job. So there are all kinds of non-productivity and productivity there, and I'm not sure quite how that relates to this issue, except that there is an opportunity as manufacture becomes more productive. If it does, there may be some limits, we don't know, that you can distribute paid work through into the so-called unproductive sector. I'm not talking about bullshit jobs, but I'm talking about jobs in the care sector and in the public sector where there is not a sort of formal productivity gain, if you like, and that we should value these things. So all of this is about changing our values, valuing time differently, valuing our lives differently, valuing the things that we, money differently. What is money for? And so that we can leave a planet for our children and grandchildren, as well as living more socially just lives now.
Hi, I have a science fiction question because do you think that the time hours will reduce the work of time will reduce with proportion with the decades? So in next 10 years, or let's say 20 years, we will work. Europe will work, or maybe a globe will work 30 hours, but in the 100 years it will go less.
No.
No, there is a limit for.
I don't know. I don't know whether it'll be. I don't think it's going to be just gradually, sort of an incremental change in that way. I think it might or might not happen. It'll happen in some places and not in others. But I think that I hope. This is about hoping, not some scientific calculation about what will happen in the future. But it's certainly interesting to think about a future where people right across the world work for money shorter hours and do other things. So, I mean, in science fiction terms, you could imagine it any way you like. After all, it's fiction.
Yeah, I'm interested. What is because consumption is like a drug. It's something very strong and something which gives people a lot of pleasure in the moment in the same moment when you are using it, doing it like a drug. And so, what could be so intensive? The family life and gardening and cooking and social life and political engagement. I don't know if it could be so enough strong to concur with such a strong drug as consumption. This is my worry.
Well, what about painting, making music, dancing, inventing things, walking, cycling, doing sport, Come on, you'll have other examples here. There are, maybe you have a particular relationship with the things that you buy, but I find all of those things more seductive and compulsive almost than going shopping. But I agree that lots of people do find consumption addictive. But there are a lot of things that, I mean, you summon up this picture of, family life, and it's all very good and everybody's being nice to everyone, but it's a bit dull. That's what you're suggesting. It's all a bit dull, but there are lots of really exciting and potentially addictive things that we can do that have no carbon footprint at all, and that don't do any harm to anybody else.
Yeah, I would just, maybe there are some other questions. I have something on my mind, but I can wait with it.
I think the man behind you wanted to. Oh, and the lady behind her.
Jak pani sobie wyobraża zmiany mentalne, które doprowadzą do tego, że ci, którzy posiadają bardzo dużo, zaczną rezygnować z tego, a z drugiej strony trzeba będzie ponosić różnego rodzaju koszty związane z tym, żeby pokryć te świadczenia, o których pani wspominała, bo to jest wszystko słuszne, tylko teraz trzeba byłoby zmienić i po prostu model gospodarczy byłoby zmienić, globalizację ograniczyć i tak dalej. Jak pani sobie wyobraża, czy to jest, jak w czasie to może być możliwe?
Well, you're completely agreeing with me there.
I totally agree with you. However, I would like to ask about this shift in mentality, because the people that have a lot would have to give up some of the things. So we need to introduce this change of approach. And then we need to also find some resources to cover up for the benefits that you described also. So for this fair division of work. So how do you think this change in mentality would take place in time, in the future?
Well, that goes back to the last slide. That things change. There's been some quite interesting studies of changes of this kind, and they take usually some kind of crisis, some leadership, some good evidence. Those are usually the things that come together to make change happen. I don't think that's actually the question you're asking, because you're saying where would the resources come from. But for a start, I think a lot of the positive social changes have come from the middle classes, in fact. Campaigning for votes for women, for example. The smoking ban. So it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that people who are better off will contribute positively to this move in the interests of sustainability, in the interests of a safe future for their children and grandchildren. That's my best bet. No.
Hello.
Hello.
I have an intuition. You could, based on my experience, you could give me some feedback on that, because I don't think that you referred to it in your presentation, namely the issue of education, training, and skills. Because from my experience, people with skills and with experience are very much, they are overworked, and then people who are less skilled, they have less work. And we can observe it, I think, on a big scale in Europe, where there is little work for young people, while the older generation, because the older generation are kind of, they have taken all the jobs that there are. And from my, like on a micro scale, if I am a very skilled and experienced worker, or well, let's start with that skills and experience that is cumulative. So if I have some skills, then I get the job, and then I do the job, so I get the experience, and then I'm much more in demand on the labor market. And kind of these causes. For me, or at least I see among my friends and in my environment, a situation where some people are overworked because they have experience, and let's say my younger brother, he can't find a job because he doesn't have experience, and he can't get it because he's not getting in the job. So the employers prefer to give another 10 hours to a worker who is skilled than to kind of reduce the productivity because they need to train the young worker. So this would be this all drop in the efficiency because we have to, in brackets, waste some time on training people who don't have the skills. How can you refer to that?
Yeah, I think you've summed it up quite well, and that does happen, and that's one of the reasons why we suggest that new labour market entrants, young people coming in, do start off on a 30-hour week and then remain on a 30-hour week, so that those cohorts are working. I mean, you've got to take into account in this how the waste of the education that the young people have. So that's already wasted if they're not getting work. So, but yes, I mean, if you're going to distribute paid work between the overworked and the underworked, so that's what you're saying, then you will need to do some more skills training. But then that is an investment in the future anyway. So it depends how you regard this kind of spending. Is it wasteful or is it an investment? Is it preventing other problems occurring? Is it going to be good for people because in the end there'll be fewer people who are poor and ill and needing health care and not contributing and having to draw on state benefits and so on. So, but you're right to say that employers do tend to prefer to just take more work from the people who are there. But we need to change these attitudes. That's what we're trying to do. Cold. How many of you are cold?
Czy jeszcze są jakieś pytania?
I'm just going to put my coat on so I don't freeze to death. I'm not going.
Well, yeah. Historically speaking, the shortening of working time was due to what was possible because basically working class struggled really hard for like century to do it, and it took really a long time. It was a long and difficult battle, and it's the current working time, like 40 hours a week. It's quite a new thing. Well, it happened like the International Work Organization introduced it. I mean, in the 30s, I think. Yes, so it was 36 or something that.
Well, they used to send children up the chimneys, didn't they, and down the mines, and so there has been a gradual improvement in both in working conditions and in working hours.
Yes,
but there was then a stop, and then it started going up again. Yeah,
my point is that it was possible because, well, the working class fought, and it was quite well organized during this time, from the let's say middle of the 18th century. We don't have such a well-organized working class like with labor unions and so on now. So who's the subject of change? Who's the agent of change? Who can be an agent of change? Experts? I don't know. Some sectors of middle class whom you convince with your arguments, because I think that your arguments I think are convincing, but still there's a need for political power and for social power, a mass of people to convince business circles to make it happen. How do you think it? Who can do it and how?
Well, you're asking a question about a whole lot of changes that we need not just this, aren't you? Because now that we have not got strong labour unions and we have weak political systems, how does change happen? The New Economics Foundation, we ask ourselves this a lot, not just about working time, but about many of the other changes we're trying to achieve. And you would have to look to, we say, well, we're looking to social movements, to form alliances and to win campaigns. And then I think the unions, who are still there, or if they're not so strong as they were, will come along eventually. They won't be spearheading this fight because they're worried about the effect on wages at the moment. But I think we have to look in any case for other ways of effecting change now that we do not have, now that the unions have been disempowered in the interests of neoliberal capitalism. We have to either remake the unions or look for other ways. And so we would look for look to social movements and campaigns, and it's not easy. So I agree with you. Revitalize the trade unions. Maybe that will happen. Some of the trade unions in the UK are organising people who don't work. They're trying to sort of branch out and do things differently. So that's interesting too.
So maybe one more connected question. How was it possible in France to reduce the working week to 35 hours, at least for 8 years? Who made that happen?
Well, it was the government. There's a very long story, so I'll be brief. But the government decided to do it mainly because they wanted to reduce levels of unemployment. And they passed 2 laws. They were called the Aubry laws, after Martine Aubry, who was the Minister of Labour at the time in the French government. And they decided to do it, which is what I would not advocate this now, for the government to pass a law saying, okay, everyone does a 35-hour week. The first law was very popular with employees, with the workers, and it was particularly, as you might imagine, with working parents of young children. But there was a great backlash, opposition from the employers, who persuaded them to pass a second law, the second Aubry law, which switched the balance of power over how the work would be distributed across the year. In other words, how much control workers had over how they would spend their time, from the worker to the employer. And at that point, it began to lose the critical mass of support from the working people. And then time passed, and there was the neoliberal paradigm in Western economies became stronger and stronger as that decade progressed. And then we have Sarkozy comes in as president, and he fights a campaign saying, I'm going to get rid of this law. So there's then a great amount of media coverage of the end of the French disaster, it's called, a disastrous experiment. In fact, what happened was that a lot of big employers stayed with the 35-hour week, even after Sarkozy. He didn't actually abolish it, but he weakened the law so much that it could be done still by firms, but it was not done because it was now a top-down. So there are 2 lessons from the French. Well, 3. If you reduce the working week, it's popular with an awful lot of employers, and that's borne out with a lot of work on other experiments. So it's popular, with employees, particularly employees who've got family responsibilities. 2, if you do it in a top-down way, you're in danger. You've got to try and make it work from the bottom up as well. And 3, you need to make sure that workers retain control, or at least some sense of control over when they can have their time, when they work and when they don't. I think those things are all important about the French experiment. There's a chapter about it in this book.
Yes, about this, because the law was not abolished now, like 2 or 3 days or a week ago. There was a declaration from the new Ministry or of Economy or of Labor in the new French government about making the 35 hours law more flexible, and there was a reaction. So it's still there, and it's still like a part of the French labor market that is, I mean, an important difference between them. And but my what the conclusions were, and it's not because the idea per se is bad, but mostly, as you said, because of the pressure of the competition and the neoliberal paradigm. But it also created more consumption than reduced it, maybe because people tend to spend their free time traveling, getting more holidays, and you could see them. It was, of course, the idea of the law, of course, as well, that with their free time, people would consume more, and the economy would, and it worked to some extent. But in the context of what you were saying about like degrowth or lower growth, this is not very conclusive, I think.
Well, that's interesting. I haven't got chapter and verse on that, so if you've got research evidence, I'd really like to know about it. But I've heard some, we have a chapter on what happened in terms of its popularity and why it declined in popularity, but not in terms of the actual.
There's this the way the thing you said about the second law allowing employers to organize it for a very big group of people. They did not pass to a 35 hours week, but they had more free days, more holidays. All the skilled workers, like there's a special socio-economic category in France that they have. So they had just like 10 or 15 extra days of holidays per year, and those were obviously spent consuming, making longer weekend. I mean, of course it's not. I mean, but still, the amount of consume. You could also see people like taking half days or days to go shopping or so. I think this is a thing that should be explored.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'd love to know if there's actually some research on the front. I don't disagree with you. I think it sounds plausible, but if there is research on it, I'd really like to know about that. And if yes, and I mean this thing about time can go either way. If there's enough money around, and if the overriding attitude, if the general culture is that consumption is good. I mean, wasn't it George Bush who said, go out shopping after 9/11 to sort of help the country get back on its feet again? Get out there and go shopping. I mean, so we've all got to take account of this.
Czy są jeszcze jakieś pytania? Okay, thank you, Anna Coote. I think we should, you're working now, and you should probably stop it at some point because the discussion can go endlessly. So thank you very much, Anna Coote, New Economics Foundation. No tak, można zajrzeć oczywiście na stronę Fundacji New Economics, tam są dostępne do pobrania różne ciekawe raporty również na ten temat. neweconomics.org. Dziękuję jeszcze raz. Dziękuję wam.
Thank you. Good questions.